So, Prof, what is wrong with the schemes that we run now? I mean, you're in charge of JAM, for instance. You see all sorts of graduates, candidates coming to you. You know, looking at all the schemes that we've run, whichever acronym you want to use, why do you think it's not just working out?
Thank you. I do not know the schemes we are talking about. My view is simply that our schemes, if I understand what you really mean, is that he talked about free education, he talked about qualitative education and so on, that all these systems we have, it appears that we are not having the type of quality education that we want.
When it is free, is it quality?
For me, nothing is free. Somebody has to pay. Even when we talk of free education, somebody was paying for the education at that time. But what we have now, in my own opinion, is that we have reached a level that unless we are deceiving ourselves, as popular as free education is, it may not be sustainable given the number that we have. Yes, it is good for us to say we want free education, which we used to have, but the reality is that I always tell people, if I am probably from UK, maybe I will not be as educated as I am today, because it's likely that I will have to take loan to go to university and I have to repay and so on and so forth. There are so many things we enjoy and we take for granted in Nigeria, and that's why we are asking for more. Yes, it's good for us to ask for more. I do not subscribe to the fact that our graduates are of less quality than what we have elsewhere. I do not subscribe. And I have so many reasons to believe that. But yes, education standards might be falling across board, but I know that, yes, we have problems with education in Nigeria, but the way we paint this is not totally the truth. Correct. Our graduates go out here, and generally, they perform better than their peers. Yes. I have been involved in the education industry for some time now. And when you send, say, 1,000 graduates of the Nigerian University to, say, UK, you'll find out that 90% of these people will perform, they will be in the first 20%, upper percentage outside there. But when we talk about the education, the working, or
the working class,
preparing them for work, it might be another thing.
Okay, that's
what. But elsewhere, yes, when you have academic qualification, they also, apart from infusing some practice into the theory, you still have professional training separated from the academic. We need to do something about preparing people for the job market.
And that's why I want to bring you in, Mr. Yusuf. I was going to talk about Empower. You know, Empower, when you talk about preparing graduates, moving on. And you have maybe, I think the scheme has about 30,000 graduates, prepare them over the course of 2 years, and, you know, they can earn a bit of money while they learn some skills. But the question I keep asking, which nobody has been able to answer, is what happens after that 2 years? I was listening to some officials in government say, oh, they are more employable afterwards. The fact that you're more employable doesn't mean you're getting a job. So yes, what happens?
Ijoma, I like to differ a little.
From whom are you differing now?
From virtually everybody.
Okay.
Because the theme of this discussion is social investment. And we seem to have been approaching it in a very narrow way. Now, if I take a cue from the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan document, there's a section there about investing in people. This is about people. A major component is education. The second component is health. A third component is environment. These are critical areas where it is not often easy for the private sector to deliver value to citizens. That is why we call it a social sector space. So we should be looking at because this discussion is not just about empower, trader money. No, it is much broader than that.
So how do you then invest in people?
And it is also not about just the federal government. All the tiers of government have responsibility in this matter.
Okay.
You are talking of developing the human capital of a country. And clearly, as Mr. Wabizi said, Mr. Akabuzi said, there are serious financing gaps.
Okay, how would you invest? How would you invest in it?
I'm coming to that.
Yes.
If you throw all the entire budget into it, it cannot fill the gap. That is why increasingly over the years, we have seen an encroachment of the private sector into the delivery of social services. We have very big private sector space now in education. Ordinarily, it should not be. And because it's becoming more expensive, because it's becoming more private sector driven, it's becoming more exclusive. Because the children of the poor cannot access quality education. And we should not build a country where a child will not be able to go to school because the parent cannot afford school fees. You don't build a country that way. All the advanced economy that guarantees free primary education, free secondary education, of course they know what they are doing. That is how to build human capital. So the investment should be in those areas from the budget point of view. But because there are serious budget limitations, we need to incentivize the private sector in that space. Right now, there is no incentives at all for private sector providers in health, for private sector providers in education, for private sector providers in environmental management.
Could that be why? These are the issues. Could that be why the services are so costly?
Of course. I mean, the private sector is there. It's not a charity organization. It's there to make money. But the government has to create a situation where you lower the cost of the provision of these services. That is what should happen. I mean, for instance, why should we be imposing tax on somebody who's running a primary school or secondary school? Such a segment should be exempted from tax. Why should we be imposing tax on a private hospital? Because the government cannot provide these services. The private sector is stepping into that space. You need to give as much generous incentives as possible so that you can fill this gap. Because we are talking about social investment. We are talking about social services. Once it is social, it's not ordinarily for the business people to do. But if the business people are there, you have to make it easy so that it can deliver value at a more accessible rate or cost.
And therefore allow room for them to still have some level of gain, because as you said, they are not charity.
It's not charity.
Now, Mr. Kabweze, coming to you now.
Yes.
Some people will say that you are sitting in the middle of all of this anyway, because no matter what they appropriate, no matter what they estimate, you are the one who gets to say,
this is
sorry, the money is not available.
Or not now.
Or not yet available. Now, if that be the case, what people say is that in other situations, they prioritize. And therefore, if government says, look, we have to find the money for this, even if it means other things may have to wait, then we'll have to look for the money. Do these investment schemes, these social investment schemes that are referred to, this homegrown school feeding program, trader money, the issue of large-scale farming, subsidies, and so on, do those things merit those kind of priorities with this government?
Well, they do, and they do get prioritized. But, you know, when there's actually nothing available, there's nothing
then
to
why
prioritize.
That's my point.
So, you know, the point here is, and we need to understand this, ab initio, the entire budget of the country is too small. On this continent, we have the lowest budget to GDP ratio. The budget for the federal government this year is 9.1 trillion naira. That's what? That's, you know, 7%, 7 to 8% of our GDP. The average, even for our continent, is like 22% of GDP. Country's budget falls. So the country, we don't have the resources, and that's something most Nigerians do not, appreciate. So when, for instance, Lawal says, "Oh, in this social space, don't tax," already even with the taxation, you don't have. The point is, anybody who is running a business on which they make profit
must expect to be taxed.
Yes, and
not double tax.
And in most countries of the world, there is a space for the private sector, a space for public sector. The problem with us is that the private sector, involvement in the social sector is growing. But it's growing in places like Lagos. So we think everybody in the country now goes to private schools. There are parts of the country where the only form of education, and we need to again understand that this is a matter, all these are matters on the concurrent legislative list. So the federal government has a role, the state government. I hear when people say Nigeria is spending this much, they're only talking about the federal government's budget. Mm-hmm. The federal government's budget is not a national budget.
It's just an arm.
Yes, the budget of an arm of government. So if you want to figure out how much the entire country is spending, you have to aggregate what this federal government is spending, what all the state governments and all the local governments. People don't understand. The local governments get revenues. They have a share of and they are required a lot to prepare annual budgets as well.
But Mr. Yusuf, if I bring it back to you, we're coming into an election year, and you find that when politicians hit the campaign trail, it is these same social investment projects that you find on their jingles. We're going to build how many schools, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. So I don't know, how do we get out of that cycle of them offering them this low-hanging fruit of maybe 10 bags of rice, or et cetera, et cetera? What can you, I still bring it back to the private sector. If you're, saying that this is not something the government can do alone, that is the only time they see these social investment projects on the campaign trail.
You have to give us that answer in 30 seconds because we've got to go now.
No, the thing is that these things are symbolic. They have very symbolic things, but in most cases, they are not sustainable. They are not deep. What can be deep and what is sustainable is what will be within the framework of mobilizing resources in a sustainable way, both from the private sector and from the public sector.
It's at that point that we're going to have to leave it. We want to thank you so much for joining us. It's looking like we're not having the really good conversation that we ought to have, but time is really against us. And therefore, we want to apologize and at the same time, thank you for joining us on the program. Mr. Ben Akabweze, Mr. Muda Yusuf, Professor Oloyede, and Mr. Adedina, thank you so much for being with us. We'll take a break, and then we'll come back with the closing remarks.